Chapter 8. The Pattern of Liberty. The pattern of tyranny has repeated itself throughout history. It cycles in every instance of evil, large and small. The pattern of liberty, however, is a singular flow that has been progressing slowly since the beginning of time. Evil has been on earth as long as man. The tactics of evil have changed infrequently, and only do so when forced by the progress of liberty. Every time liberty has progressed, one of the ideas or concepts of evil has died. When cultural control over people is broken, the pattern of liberty takes another step forward, and culture has been forced to adapt to maintain control over people. By using threats of death, torture, mutilation, and imprisonment, every kingdom on earth has prospered. War created the empires of history, and culture preserved them. All who would not submit to the rule of law were killed. Such ignorance of the power of culture is a thing of the past. Modern technology, brought by increasing degrees of freedom, is allowing the people of the world to see culture for what it is. The pattern of liberty shows how freedom has progressed through history. While cultures around the world teach that evil's control is strengthening, the pattern of liberty shows clearly that evil is weakening. The pattern of liberty predicts the ultimate failure of culture and the ultimate end of evil. Progress through history. The pattern of liberty tracks the destruction of ideas and empires through history. It also tracks the progress of principles and technology. Gunpowder. One of the defining technologies that dramatically altered the scope of culture was gunpowder. Prior to its availability, only those who could amass strong armies could effectively defend their land and families. This meant that people were heavily at the mercy of governments and kings. Once gunpowder became available, even small bands of families could challenge the mighty castles of empires. Gunpowder reshaped the kingdoms of earth by empowering people to challenge the violent control employed by the lords of war. The printing press. The printing press reshaped the nature of culture like nothing the world had ever seen. Before its invention, almost nobody knew how to read. It was simply too expensive to own a book. Once the cost of printing dropped, literacy skyrocketed. Information was standardized on a scale unknown in all of history. It became much more difficult for cultures to center their power on the ignorance of people. Religion was dominated by those who could control the scriptures. With this power, they were able to influence the political freedoms and even the very lifestyles of people. The Bible was the first book printed and soon spread far and wide. Though the Roman Church had men killed for translating the Bible into native languages such as English, it eventually became available in every language on earth. Theocratic power in the Christian world fragmented, and people chose to pursue divergent ideas. The printing press was the foundation of all technology. Whereas mathematics and engineering have existed in strength in different areas in history, they never survived. War destroyed the information learned. After the printing press, so many copies of books could be maintained that human knowledge persisted in writing and spread as fast as the thirst for it demanded. The Great American Experiment. The Great American Experiment was a proof for the world. It dared to call the bluff of culture and test what people would do with liberty. Whereas culture had long taught that people were not able or worthy of ruling their own lives, the American Rebellion taught people that they were fully able to live life without a king. They taught by their actions and wittings that men were worth more than governments. This experiment in freedom lived past its first test, as they defeated the armies of King George. The shock that rang through the world was enough to shatter the bonds of the culture of royalty that had enslaved Earth for thousands of years. Internet. The internet and modern computing power have destroyed cultural ignorance once and for all. Like the printing press before it, the internet has made possible the widespread dissemination and near indestructibility of information. The bonds of culture are founded in the control of speech and control of the mind. When people are free to speak what they think, people learn wisdom at an astonishing pace. For cultures to succeed, they require imposed ignorance and cultivation of planned thought. As soon as people question the rule of law, authority is lost. The cultural shift away from intellectual property is a telltale sign of the end of government rule. In the past, information was regarded as owned by the people who developed it. This meant that anyone who attempted to use that information could be punished by the violence of law. The future holds a shift in thinking that few will be willing to accept until they see it happen. Intellectual property is not a principle, since it must be enforced by restricting the liberties of people. It is an idea and a construct of law. The shift that awaits the world is one of the impossibility of enforcement. Law will struggle mightily in defense of authority and taxability, but will ultimately lose. This is the power of global communication and information retention. Nearly every law will become impossible to enforce. The principles of computing power give the freedom necessary for people to escape tyranny. Violence replaces culture. When cultures break down and the authorities they protect are threatened, violence grows. Violence is a necessary component of control. Violent enforcement is necessary to ward off sedition. Violence changes the dynamics by making the cost of freedom death. Every time the pattern of liberty has progressed throughout history, violence has increased. The future will be no different. As people learn about freedom and see what is possible in their own lives, evil will clamp down. Authorities will employ greater degrees of violence as they lose their grip on power. This is the death of culture. This is the meaning of war. As the pattern of liberty reaches its final step, the most oppressed cultures on earth will lose adherents the quickest, and those cultures will produce the most violent crackdowns. One of the evidences of this violence is terrorist attacks. Those in modern times are no different from terrorist attacks in history. Oppressed peoples do not want to be oppressed. When they learn of freedom, they seek more of it for their own lives. Evil cultures always demonize freedom, because the United States of America has been historically freer than other places, it is attacked by terrorist regimes in an attempt to teach enslaved peoples that freedom is weakness. They teach that freedom is depravity and insecurity. Such attacks have nothing to do with the people being attacked. They are about maintaining the grip of cultural slavery over oppressed peoples. The violence of dying cultures can destroy millions of lives, but it never lasts long. Earth's era of wars is over. The rapid pace of nation creation and destruction is evidence of the accelerating pace of the pattern of liberty. New cultural twists invented by evil men are discovered and crushed. Technology and population. One of the principles of history is that freedom is a function of population. Population growth endangers tyranny. All the major tyrants of history have sought to limit growth. Births expand the human experience and teach people about opportunity, hope, and faith. This freedom is not conducive to slavery. The more people that live in a culture, the more dissent you will find. It is nearly impossible to control large numbers of people with primitive cultures. One of the evidences of the completion of the pattern of liberty is the astounding population of Earth. Technology endangers evil on every hand. Its use, implementation, and imagination are diametrically opposite evil. Technology is born of freedom. Freedom brings wisdom to people who implement learned principles in practical solutions. This search for wisdom teaches people the value that they have within themselves. It teaches them to stretch the limits of their intelligence and faith. This is more than concerning to the control of authority. It is the death of evil. The use of technology enables the evasion of authority. One powerful example of this is the evasion of taxation. Governments are institutionalized extortion. When technology allows people to remove the control of money from government hands, taxation becomes impossible. Advanced encryption and anonymous peer-to-peer networking technology allow for exactly this. Economic exchanges are freed from the bounds of legal tender and regulation. The future of technology brings the impossibility of tracking money and enforcing taxation. This transition will be marked by violence as governments try to salvage their monstrous rates of extortion. The comforts and prosperity of technology demonstrate to the world what the fruits of freedom are. It is entirely impossible to hide from culturally enslaved peoples the glory that is human life. Principles and products leak through every culture on earth. The kings of old have fallen. Communism is weakened. Theocracy is dying. Democracies are bankrupt. Violence will mark the transitions, but freedom will prevail. The American Dream. The American dream was for a land where people would be free from the interference of government. The dream was one of freedom to pursue joy and happiness. Today, culture teaches that the American dream is a specific and tightly defined perspective on the perfect life, and that the reason the United States of America is great is because it has the ability to create that life for you. Culture perverts everything good. The American dream is not an American dream. The great American experiment brought massive liberty to the people of America, more than had been seen at any other time or place on earth. The experiment and the dream are not for Americans. The United States of America is not to be respected as a nation. It is not a favored group. There is no magic, no cultural supremacy in the red, white, and blue. The great American experiment is to be respected only because it taught people that they are worth more than the law. The government of the United States of America in modern times closely resembles both a democracy and a welfare state. It is bankrupt and heavily enforced by legions of law. Culture would have you believe that this is its legacy. It is not. The Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and the very action of rebellion against a king taught the people of the world that government had no natural right over them. These things taught the whole earth that they owed government and authority nothing. It told people that authority should never tell them what they could say, how they could worship, what they could print, and where they could gather. It told people that law enforcement is a dangerous animal, and they ought to be able and willing to defend themselves against it. It taught people that government and authority can be limited. It taught people that they were worth more than the law. This mighty step, taken in the pattern of liberty, has nothing to do with democracy or government. The power and beauty of this step was the anti-culture created by men of rebellion. They attacked every leg of authority by teaching people about a measure of their own worth. The experiment has proven successful. Freedom for people does not create anarchy. America is not perfect, and it will not be the end of freedom. Mankind's thirst for liberty will not endure the tyrannies of earth for long. They will be taught that they are worthy of ruling their own lives. The pattern of tyranny will be broken. The American dream is not an American dream. It is a human dream. It was a giant stair climbed on the backs of heroes toward the freedom of men. It will not be the last. Competition for freedom. As people are able to look beyond the tyranny of their own lives to divergent cultures on earth, they will see a competition for freedom. The lure of freedom will be evidenced by the technology, prosperity, and peace of freer peoples. They will ask why it is noble for them to obey certain laws, but not the rest of the world. They will see that those things which are demanded of them are not natural, that they are tyranny. The pattern of liberty progresses every time the lies of culture are discovered and understood. Though cultures are designed to maintain tight control of the minds of people so that they cannot see the tyranny over them, witnessing freedom can break the bonds nearly instantly. When the violence of dying cultures runs out and freedom peeks out of every dark place on earth, the people of the world will begin a competition for freedom. When there is freedom to move and shop for jurisdictions, you will find that people move to freer societies, not stricter ones. Moreover, elements of evil will gravitate to more restricted societies because they are easier to exert control over. This is the final chapter for evil. Technology, communications, and wisdom free people to evade authority, and they will do so with ever-increasing effectiveness. This is the completion of the pattern of liberty. This is where evil ends.